Welcome, Whitney. I'm really so thrilled and honored to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
So I found you on Instagram, and I mentioned that in the intro. And what struck me is, in this little square, it's kind of a place. I think you can have a little bit of a BS detector sometimes, and I don't know, you just struck me immediately. Your honesty, your eloquence, the rawness of what you're going through, of what you've been through, and what you continue to go through. And what I appreciate so much, and what I want to convey to some of the people today who might be listening, I think everybody's going to experience grief in different losses, but how there's not any major great book on it. There's lots of books on grieving, but that you don't read until you're in it. So I think there's ways that you can share your story that not only might help somebody that's grieving, but might also, more importantly, help people to support people who are grieving. So let's just start from the beginning.
Okay.
You were married, and so that's another story. Like, what is it like when your spouse is dead and somebody says, "Are you married?" Like, that is like, you feel married anymore? Like, when is it that you started to say something different, or like, does it still feel strange?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So my situation was very different than a lot of people's experience with losing a spouse, because it was both sudden and not sudden because of the nature of Ryan's injury. It was a very severe brain injury from anaphylaxis from a bee sting. So it wasn't like cancer where you can still kind of like talk to the person up until the time that they get really, really ill, or at like some other diseases. With Ryan, once he had his cardiac arrest, which caused the brain injury, he did not exist anymore in terms of who Ryan was. So I say that he died twice for me, and I know his family, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, they feel the same way. So his accident happened on October 14th, 2021. And that for me really felt like the day that he died. Obviously, I felt still married to him during that time period. Like, I was still married to him. I took care of him. I was devoted to him. But I had a chance to distance myself from the fact that I knew that Ryan probably would never come back in the capacity as a husband as he was prior to October 14th. So it's like you're grieving in that interim between even though you still have hope for a miracle, realistically that probably won't happen because it's so rare and it would have to be a miracle. So you really start grieving, and I started the grieving process. So, in my mind, to protect myself, I had to be like, I'm not going to be married soon, or when he dies, like, I'm not going to be married. So when his physical body died, and I had, lived out the till death do us part, that we say in our vows when you get married, I did feel a very, like, almost like a cosmic shift. Like, I did not feel married anymore because I had already not had his support as a husband, that confidant, someone to tell about your day, someone to hug you and kiss you like a spouse would. So it's like I had so much time to have that separation. Like, I was living by myself for 6 months before his physical body died. And for someone that's been with someone for 10 years, that feels like an eternity not to have that person with you. So I know a lot of widows, they'll leave their wedding rings on for a long time, which is totally fine after their spouse died. For me, I took mine off pretty soon after Ryan died because it just felt like I wasn't married anymore because I already had that separation. So I think to answer your question, I think after Ryan's physical body died was when I did not feel married anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I'm imagining there's no right or wrong path to preparing for someone's death. Like, it could happen. Like, if he had died that day, you would have had lots of months. Was there I guess let's backtrack so that people know what we're talking about. I'm going to say, was there any kind of silver lining to having a little more time while his physical body was still here, but you knew that Ryan as a husband was not going to be coming back. So let's backtrack for people who haven't read your amazing book. Can you tell everybody about the day that Ryan had this bizarre and probably very, very so rare accident that led to eventually his death?
Okay. Yeah, it was such a normal day. It was 2 days after our 8-year wedding anniversary. So we were married October 12th, 2013. So we had celebrated our 8-year wedding anniversary 2 days before, and Ryan had a pretty rare day off because he worked a lot during the summertime going into the fall because a lot of people in his department, he was a canine officer, they go to their beach houses, and that's when he kind of put in a lot of his work. So I think he had taken off for our anniversary like the couple days before his accident. And he went to the gym, which he was very avid CrossFitter. So we went to the gym, and I could only guess because I didn't get enough details from him before he had his reaction, but he told me when he got back from the gym that he had gotten stung on the inside of one of his arms, which he did show me because I was working from home that day when he got home. And it probably wasn't even a minute after he said that, once he got home from the gym, that he said, I feel really weird.
Had he ever had any, I'm sorry, had he been stung by a bee before? Did he know?
Yes.
Yeah. And
he had been fine. So he had no known reaction, allergic reaction to bee venom. He had been stung in childhood. He had been stung in adulthood, even during our marriage. So when he got stung, which I think was probably in the car on the way home from the gym, it was a warm October day on the East Coast. So he liked to have his windows open. So I'm guessing the bee flew in when he was driving. And the gym is about 10 minutes away. So I'm only guessing. That would just make sense to me. And then when he got home, he started feeling very weird. And then I knew, because he told me he had gotten stung by a bee, I knew what was happening. The way that he sounded just made the hair stand up on my body, because it was just chilling the way he said that. And I immediately called 911. I was 26 weeks pregnant, so I'm like not moving that fast, but like I moved very fast. Was trying to get Benadryl from our medicine cabinets, and we only had children's Benadryl. But like while this is all happening, because you're in like fight or flight, and I was just like, I guess I went into tunnel vision. So all I'm really hearing and concentrating on is what the 911 operator is asking me and telling me, and I'm trying to give her information and directions. And like they ask a lot of information when you're on the phone with 911. It's not like they just they dispatch right away, but they ask you a lot of questions. So I was so focused on giving her the information. Ryan went downstairs during this time, and his canine Louie followed him. And I remember just how he looked going down the stairs. He just looked like he was stumbling, like he almost disoriented. And then I lost sight of him. And then suddenly the 911 operator said, "Do you know where he is now?" And I didn't, because I was so tunnel vision on talking to her. So I run downstairs. I can't find him. He's not responding to my yelling. And then suddenly I see that our front door is cracked open. So I fling open the door, and Ryan is sitting on our stoop, passed out, slumped over. So I rush over to him, and he was a big guy. He was 220 pounds, 6'2", very muscular, very fit. And like I'm 5'2", 26 weeks pregnant. Like I'm straining to try to put him back and not like hit his head on the ground. So I kind of like almost like bear hug him. So I'm like behind him. And he's having trouble breathing at this point, but he's not completely unresponsive. He cannot respond to me because he can't breathe. And the 911 operator instructed me to start CPR. So that's what I did. And then he was kind of in and out of like gasping for air and then like almost not breathing. And during this time, I'm just screaming like for anybody to come help me.
Yeah.
And it was so weird that day. We live in this neighborhood where neighbors are very close. Like they always wave and come over, and there's always like people walking their dogs. And on that day, there was like nobody out. It was just so eerily quiet. And one of our neighbors was sawing a tree. So my screams were getting drowned out by that. So it was just like the perfect storm of events for people to not hear my screams and for help. And then the EMS did get there. I have no idea how long they took. It felt like forever. I think it was just like 5 minutes or something, because we don't live in like, we're not in the middle of nowhere. We're like in the center of town. And when they got there, I rushed off the porch and kind of let them do their thing. And during that time is when Ryan went into cardiac arrest, and they couldn't start his heart for about 20 minutes. And they finally got his heart started in the ambulance while they were taking him to the hospital. And I was already on my way to the hospital to meet him.
I can't even imagine that. Like, how many times you must have relived that scene in your head, because it's like it's like being a step behind like reality, like what is happening, and trying to keep literally your head on and follow the instructions. But it sounds like there was nothing that was going to prevent this final big event, which is that he lost oxygen to his brain for 20 minutes. And so when people hear about being on life support, or like, did you immediately get the word that there was not brain activity, or what did they tell you at first?
So he was sent to the hospital that's closest to us. So they didn't have what Ryan needed. So he was airlifted to Penn Presbyterian in Philadelphia that has a neuro ICU. But while we were at Doylestown Hospital, which is like just a town hospital, and it's very good, they didn't have what we needed. So they couldn't do like the brain testing there. But obviously, not having oxygen for 20 minutes is not good. And there was a hospitalist there that said, he shouldn't have said this, because I think it was premature and also not like in his specialty. But he said, the prognosis is really poor. And even though we had no brain testing, so, my mother-in-law and I just like, we stared at each other and we kind of just like told him to go away, because we didn't want to hear that like right then.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was not the best bedside manner. But anyway, I pushed to have him transferred to somewhere that had a neuro ICU, and we got him a bed in Philadelphia. And, they did imaging there, and he it showed a severe anoxic brain injury. So it showed that parts of his brain were very damaged from the lack of oxygen. And when you are deprived of oxygen for that long, your brain, it's damaged. Like it's traumatic, even though it's not like a physical force. So there's a lot of swelling that happens. So the real risk after anoxia is that the brain will swell to a point where it basically goes into your brainstem, which you would be instantly brain dead. So Ryan was not brain dead. Mm-hmm. And they did everything that they could to prevent the swelling from, exacerbating to the point where he was brain dead. So he avoided brain death. And Ryan was he was on a ventilator. And he was in very, very, very critical condition, especially the first 2 weeks after his injury, because that's when the swelling is the highest. They put a bolt in his head, literally did brain surgery like at bedside, and it records the swelling, the ICP, which is the intracranial pressure in your brain. So they're able to titrate medications to help with the swelling. So it's the most accurate way to show how much brain swelling is happening. And they just had that available at Penn Presbyterian, which we are very grateful for. They had a lot of things that a lot of hospitals do not have. So Ryan was able to avoid brain death, and his the swelling did subside, but there was still so much damage from the lack of oxygen. So he was able to come off the ventilator. He weaned himself off the ventilator, which was, I think, a miracle in itself that he was able to do that. They put a trach in because when you have a brain injury, you still can't manage secretions. Like you can't swallow like we can. You can't eat because your awareness is not, it's
Right.
so minimal. So they have to maintain an airway. So he had surgery. So instead of having the tubes down his throat to maintain some sort of airway, just in case he needed oxygen again, they put a tube in your throat so you can attach a ventilator just in case you need it, and other devices to help with respirations and whatnot. And they also put in a G tube so he could get nutrition that way because he couldn't eat. And during his time in the ICU, which was 8 weeks, he was starting to respond to commands, very minimally, but he was moving his hand, one of his hands, or his arm to command. And, we were very hopeful because, that was a huge deal coming from completely in a coma, unresponsive to like moving stuff. So, we had a lot of hope when we were in the ICU. And then that kind of changed after we left there.
So from the ICU, and when you're in the ICU, was it just kind of like wait and see the messaging that you were getting? Like, we're not sure what kind of, brain damage there is, how much he will get back or rewire. What were you being told at that point?
Yeah. So in the ICU, the doctors actually gave us the option to take Ryan off of life support because of the amount of damage that they could see on the studies. So like that would have made sense to take him off life support based on those imaging. But because they also told us that because, sometimes because it's the brain, they don't know just because the imaging is bad, what that means in terms of clinical outcomes, because they explain sometimes really bad studies can be a better clinical outcome than good studies because the brain does and can rewire itself and it's very mysterious in that way and is unlike any other organ of the body. So I wanted to give Ryan, because he's so young and I so wanted him to get better and I so wish for a miracle and hope for one. I wanted to give him time to fight. And in my brain I was thinking I'll know when we're done fighting, but right now we're not done fighting yet. So I said we're not doing that. And like I said, he was able to come off the ventilator and be discharged from the ICU. So I felt like when I say I, it really was me and my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. We all made the decision together to do this. So it wasn't just me. But, because it's the brain, you don't know. So I wanted to give Ryan the best chance of recovery. And he did. He fought really hard to come back.
Did he ever show anything more than a few signs from those early days?
Unfortunately, no. That was what he was doing in the ICU was the extent, like that was the best that he did after that time. And then when he got out of the ICU, he went to rehab. We got him into Moss Rehab, which we were told, like, you know, that's where miracles happen. So it's one of the best brain rehabs in the entire country, and it's pretty close to where we live. And he physically was not doing well. He was aspirating through his trach because of, he had a lot of secretions. So he was getting pneumonias, and rehab is no joke. Like, they put you through a lot physically, and he just couldn't do it. So the first time he was admitted to rehab, he couldn't physically do the rehab program. So and he ended up in the ER like 2 or 3 times, which was very traumatic for me. It was traumatic for Ryan and our family. This was like right before Christmas. Horrible. So he was transferred from Moss to an acute care facility, which is like a step down from an ICU, to get better physically before he could go back to rehab, because they couldn't manage him at rehab. You have to have a baseline, like physical, like your physicality needs to be pretty stable in rehab, because they can't manage it there. So he needed to get physically better before they could even work on the rehab. So he was there. And during that time, I got COVID from one of his nurses at the acute rehab. It was right before I was like going to give birth. And they shut everything, like they shut it down. Like, they put him on quarantine for 14 days, even though he tested negative twice, would not allow any family members, even healthy ones, to see him. And I really think this is when things just like went downhill, because when you have that kind of brain injury, you need constant stimulation. And he was getting it while we were there before that time. And then it just like stopped. And then he wasn't getting like any stimulation. Like, there's no nurses even coming in a lot because he was on quarantine, and like there's only so much like time that they spend with them. So when the 14 days were up, that was the time period that I actually gave birth to our second son. And when I came back after he was done his quarantine, I just felt like he had really regressed. Like, the light like went off. I feel like he just stopped fighting during that time.
So you are just in this whole time period, you have a toddler, you're preparing for birth, and you're probably, I imagine, having the thoughts of what is next. When did you start to discuss with either the family or start to think for yourself, like, this is not what he would want? This is not what any of us would want. This. And by the way, I've worked in rehab. I've worked in brain injury unit. I've worked in subacute and acute. And it is very clear when someone's life, quality of life, is just never going to be anything that they would want for themselves. And yet they aren't able to express it. And so the burden is put on the family, which is really challenging. But it's ultimately a gift. And it takes, and that's really this courage that you have, having all these other things you're figuring out with the new baby, and with the grief of your husband not being who he was, but also then having to decide that this is not what he would want. When did you come to that, and who helped you with that?
Yeah, I think after I saw Ryan when he was out of quarantine, and I just saw like he really had become like a shell. I think in the ICU, he would still look like Ryan, like, because he hadn't lost as much weight because it was close to his accident. And then like when you don't see somebody for, 14 days, and then you see them again in this position, and like he just lost a lot of weight, and he just I think that was the time period that I really started thinking like he's not gonna come home. But I wanted to go through the motions. Like, I still hope for a miracle. And, he was supposed to go back to rehab. So he was able to get discharged back to rehab and do that. And then when he was in rehab for the second time, um, and we weren't seeing any improvement, and he was deteriorating physically. And I think a lot of people don't understand that when you have a brain injury, it's not just like you can't respond and eat and do anything that makes you, but your physical body, because you're in bed, really suffers. And a brain injury is so unique because there are other things that happen to your body that physically affects you. So Ryan was getting hyper growth of bone, like in some of his joints because of the brain injury, and that happens a lot with brain injury. So when they were doing physical therapy, you would try to like stretch out his knees or his elbows or those joints, like you could see he was grimacing. And he did feel pain because that's such a it's a very fundamental thing that he could feel that. And you could tell when he was in pain. And I just saw like him suffering when that was happening. And like he needed the rehab, because if you don't move those things, it just gets worse. But like he was in pain. He had to be on medication because of that, because of the bone growth and to stop that, and also the pain. And then, like he still had the trach, and he was still like not able to like swallow. So he was just like, it's just when you go from seeing a man that could take care of himself, and like he's a police officer and he can do all these amazing things, and then to like almost, it was worse than a newborn child. Like he couldn't even swallow his spit. So you'd have to clean him up, and then he's coughing out of his trach, and you were constantly having to clean him up, and it's heartbreaking. And I think when he came back to rehab for the second time, and I'm just seeing the after effects physically of what this is doing to him, I just knew, I knew he would not want to live like that.
And were you talking about this with his family, and were you kind of all on board with this?
Yeah. So, I mean, we were all experiencing all of this together and separately, because just the policy, like, so COVID was happening last year, like the Omicron was going around. So there were so many policies and stuff for COVID. So we could only go see Ryan one at a time. So we were having our time separately with him and experiencing his, regression, like individually, and then also like then coming together and discussing like what we're seeing and experiencing, and just like the despair, and just so many different emotions. So all of this was decided with myself, my mother-in-law, and sister-in-law. And, we went to Ryan's doctor at rehab, and we said, we're like done fighting here. Ryan's done fighting. What would palliative care look like? What would hospice look like? We want to know what those things would look like so we can make a decision, because we're done. We're done.
Yeah. And where did he go for hospice? Did he need to stay in the hospital for that, or did he go to a special place?
Yeah, so he was stable enough where he could actually go home, but home was not at our home, because I didn't want Ryan to die in a place where, well, especially our oldest son was, because I didn't want Jackson, our oldest son, who was 4 at the time, to have any like traumatic memories of his dad dying in his home. I did not want to do that to him. So graciously, Ryan's cousin Michael, who I'm very close with and who Ryan was very close with, offered his house for hospice. So he did go home, and we didn't have to navigate COVID restrictions or policies and procedures. Like anybody could come in and see Ryan. And that's what we wanted, because we were, not only are we battling trying to take care of someone with a severe brain injury, but we're battling against all these restrictions in the hospital and visiting policies, and like it adds a whole other dimension of frustration and trauma, honestly,
Yeah,
because
feeling very, very a lot of solitude there, isolated
yeah,
in what you're
isolated.
experiencing. Yeah.
Yeah, and unfortunately, not all medical providers and facilities are created alike, and there were some that you could tell like there was a lot of humanity in them, and some places where there was not.
They just, yeah. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about like the aftermath, the final weeks, the final days, the aftermath. What have you found was really, really incredibly helpful and nurturing for you? And what have you found maybe that hasn't been as helpful? That, right off the bat, I think most people's intentions are good, but I think a lot of people are, I know a lot of people are very uncomfortable with grief, very uncomfortable with tragedy. My dad died, he was almost 80. Ryan, your husband, 32. I mean, this is a tragedy. So it's like all the layers. And people will say things that can be helpful or maybe not so helpful. So I think that one thing that you do on your Instagram and otherwise, I feel like you're helping people by sharing your story, and I'm hoping it's helping you as well. But what helped you and what wasn't as helpful during that time?
Yeah, so you're right. I think people, they're so desperate to know like the right things to say, the perfect things to say. And it's not about saying anything, honestly. Like, there's no perfect words that are going to make it better. There are no perfect words that are going to bring peace to somebody. It's not in what people say, it's how people show up. And like you said, people are so uncomfortable with just being in the presence of grief because it's so raw and it's so painful, and you don't know like what to do. So for me, it's the people that just didn't expect anything from me. Because when you're in it like that, your social graces go out the window. Like, I was another person. Like, if, when in normal life, when you're not in crisis and you see somebody, you feel the obligation to like have a conversation with them. When you're in trauma and crisis, you have no energy to give anybody else. And so the people that just like sat with me and I literally didn't say a word and they were okay with me not even saying hello to them, like, those are the people that were so amazing. And they were just like, they didn't even ask me what I needed. They're just like, I know Whitney likes coffee. Like, I'm going to bring her coffee. I'm just going to sit with her. And like those things, and it seems so small, but it was so significant because I didn't feel pressure to have to like entertain or provide information or explain myself or like be pleasant. Like, I mean, I probably came off like such a bad person because like I was not nice. Like, like I said, all social graces go out the window. Like, you're not pleasant.
Well, and I think that, yeah, and this is important to realize too, like, because I've done this before too, before I kind of learned more about grief and how to be there for somebody, like, writing something or saying like, I'm here for you, let me know what you need. Well, that is a burden because that's you have no energy to even decide what you need. So, and if you're not sure, like Whitney likes coffee, you could just send a gift certificate or or just a, hey, I hope, just you're in my thoughts. I love you. Here's a hug.
Yeah.
Or I'm picking up your kid today. Or all the things that take that burden of energy off because you're, like you said, you're sapped.
Yeah. You have so much on your plate. So somebody just taking one thing off your plate without having to ask you what you need is so crucial. Like, there were some of Ryan's family members like would just come over my house and like if they saw a basket of laundry that needed to be folded, like they'd fold it. And like that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, that helped so much. And they didn't say a word to me. It was just done. Like, when I got home, or like Ryan's aunt went to the grocery store and got groceries for me, and like she spent like so much time at Wegmans, like getting everything and like putting everything in my fridge and my pantry. And so when I would come home from hospice, because Brian was on hospice for 22 days, which is a really long time, and I had a newborn. So I actually didn't stay the night until like the very end because logistically it was a nightmare. Um, so I only started staying there when Ryan was like very close to death because it was just too hard because I needed like the crib and like the baby stuff. Even though during the day I was there all day. So people showing up in that way, and like you said, like just showing up with coffee because I'm exhausted, or a meal. I'm just sitting with you and letting you cry, or just vent, or like telling you like a funny story just to get your mind off of something.
Mm-hmm.
Like people think you don't want to talk about anything else, but honestly, like I wanted to be distracted. Like I wanted to laugh. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'd be like, tell me gossip. Like I want to just be out of my head right now.
That's so important. That's so important.
No.
Like sometimes people are afraid to like say, well, I was doing this with my family. It's like, oh wait, you're suffering right now with your family. I better not. But it's not like it's not this or that. It's like all of it. Just because I'm having a suffering in my situation, I want to it helps to hear about and to be lighthearted about something that happens in your family. It's again, I feel like people are just none of us are taught this, and it's such. Some people have the instincts of like really how to show up, and other people just are uncomfortable with it. So when he did finally leave his body in this last day of hospice, what were you feeling? Were you feeling like, I'm sure it was a mixture. There's got to be relief that he's not suffering. I mean, that's always there. That doesn't mean that this is the thing. People don't realize you can have a lot of emotions and hold them all. So feeling relief doesn't mean you're like grateful the person's not there. People are so black and white. Like, yeah, you can feel relief and also feel tremendous sorrow. So what were you feeling?
Yeah, that day it was so chaotic. It was the most chaotic day of hospice, and hospice was so chaotic. And also that's another thing people don't realize, especially when we're talking about like a young person, like with a young family. I mean, kids were running around, people were coming in and out, like they're lively young people coming in, and like there's laughing. So I mean, it was a very human experience. I just want to add that. But like on the day that Ryan died, I mean, it was 22 days. It was a really long time. And he had a few episodes before the day that he died where we thought he was going to die. Like we were told like it was his, like it was it, and it wasn't. So we were like, oh, like we were just like, okay, if it happens, it happens. Cause like, it's such a crazy experience. Cause you obviously, you don't want this person to go, but you're like, I want you to go because everybody is suffering here. Like we're all suffering. So the day that Ryan died, he died in the afternoon at around 1:00, and everyone was like screaming and having lunch, and like I was distracted. And the only reason that I knew that he was going was because the hospice nurse came up to me and was like, this is it. Because like we had been waiting for 22 days and it hadn't happened yet. So no one was like focused on him like in that moment. So everyone was kind of like doing their thing. And that morning was really heavy. I don't know. I think so it's actually the day that Ryan died is my sister-in-law's birthday. So it was my sister-in-law's birthday. And for some reason we all kind of knew like that was the day. So that morning we were all hysterically crying. And how you would expect people to be that are waiting for somebody to die or after somebody dies. And then after he died, I was with him when he took his last breath. And after he died, I was so sad, but also a part of me was very, like you said, very relieved that it was over. He was no longer like stuck in his body. He was no longer suffering. He fought so hard. I don't think he wanted to go, but he didn't have a choice, which is why I think he hung on for so long. I mean, the amount of medication that they gave him, they said like they've never given somebody and seen them like survive that long. Like that's how
Right.
much medication. And we were
Yeah.
telling them to like keep giving him medication because he wouldn't go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then after I kind of sat with him for a little bit, and it was, I'd prepared myself so long for this moment, and I just wanted to go home. Like,
Mm-hmm.
so I sat with Ryan for a few minutes, and everyone, was around me hysterically crying. And I kind of just like got my composure and I started going upstairs and packing my stuff so I could go home and like bring my babies home. And because I just felt it was like a release. Like now I'm stepping into my new life that I now have to create. And like I felt that,
Right.
like that heaviness of the unknown, the heaviness of being stuck in this portal of like literal hell because you're
Yeah,
in
you're
hell.
suspended for months. It's
Mm-hmm.
got to be like, let me go to the next day, and so
Yeah.
we can all start to heal and process what has happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
What?
Because there's no closure. There's no moving forward. You are literally
Mm-mm.
stuck. So on that day, I finally felt like, okay, I can start moving forward.
Mm. And since that day, what have been some really important things that have helped you heal?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, physical movement, exercise has always been so integral to my life. And obviously when Ryan was in the hospital, like that went out the window. And like, your mental health really suffers when you're not like moving and doing all those things. And obviously you're not eating right. I mean, it was a mess. Like you're drinking more alcohol if you drink alcohol because you're just trying to like numb yourself. Like I was a mess. So after Ryan died, I was like, I need to get my body and mind, you know, focused on being healthy again and centered again, because I know that you can't just like heal your mental without the physical. Like everything is connected. So, getting back to working out, getting out in nature, starting to, treat my body better, like not, numbing myself with alcohol, eating something beyond protein bars and coffee all day. And like baked goods was, helped me so much. And then getting new routines and rhythms, because you lose your identity when you lose a spouse, especially when you lose a spouse, because everything is tied up in this
Mm.
other person. Like when you're with someone for that long, everyone refers to you as like Whitney and Ryan. It's not just like, you're tied to this person. And it was just me now. And, I didn't just want to be Ryan's widow. I wanted to be Whitney. And I wanted to be, you're a new person after you lose someone. So I knew I had to recreate myself again. So that meant creating routines in my day where I could feel more centered and at peace and like not overwhelmed by grief all the time. Because you need to go in your grief, but you also need to come out of it. You can't just be in it all the time. You need breaks from it because physically, mentally, spiritually, it's too heavy.
Yeah.
Um, and then also for me, I had two babies. So although everything in those first few months felt so heavy, like everything you feel like you're swallowing down a lump in your throat because you just want to cry all the time. I still force myself to like do things that I enjoyed before Ryan's accident, like going out with friends, taking the boys to activities, just practicing getting back to my life, because I couldn't hide myself because I had two young children. I didn't have that, I guess, luxury, but honestly, I think that was such a blessing because I couldn't just numb myself out.
So your baby was born after his accident, and
Okay.
your now 5-year-old. How did you know what to say? Did you like look at a book for that? Did you ask for how? Like, how do you explain to a little toddler like dad is not the same and he's changed, and then eventually he's dying? How do you even find the words for that?
Yeah, so after Ryan's accident, Jackson, so he was 3 at the time, like 3.5.
Mm-hmm.
And, it was like his dad was there one morning and then he wasn't. And, I just intuitively knew like I needed to just tell him the truth and everything that was going on and be transparent. And, I said, Daddy got really hurt and now he's in the hospital and the doctors are trying to make him better. And, as our journey is kind of continuing and, Ryan is still in the hospital, I wanted to give him context. So like I begged the people at Penn to let Jackson come and see Ryan to give him context of like where mommy was going every day and like where daddy was, like that he still exists in this world. Like he's still here. He's just, this is where he is now.
Mm-hmm.
So he was able to see Ryan, I think 2 or 3 times while he was in the ICU. And I think that was really helpful because it did give him context of like where daddy is and what hospital looks like and what doctors look like and like all these things. And, there were some people that were like, I don't think that you should do that because that's really like traumatic. I'm like, no, like he needs to know where his dad is. Like he doesn't realize that he's still like here.
Well,
Like,
and also that, like dad just left and I don't see him again. That can be translated in a lot of ways. It's like a
okay,
fear like that could just happen to anybody. It's like, no, this was a very rare accident. And this is what, yeah, that can be scary to look at somebody, but it's also the reality. And I think that processing in years to come is good, even now, but years to come is going to be super helpful to have that because it wasn't like dad as he was just vanished.
right. I think that is more traumatic to a child than showing them the reality of what illness and sickness looks like. And, I think we try to protect our kids too much. So much so that we like lie to them.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's going to hurt him no matter what.
Yeah.
What is
But,
going to hurt him less in the long run so that he can heal is
okay.
that this happens, and the doctors try and make it better, and sometimes that doesn't work. But it's, we're going to be fine, and we're sad about daddy. It's not dad just left, and they're trying to make him better, and you don't have any, like,
Right.
little head concept of that.
Right. Exactly. And then as the process, evolved and then Ryan was put on hospice and like there was a middle part where Jackson couldn't see Ryan because of the COVID policies. He saw him like a couple times in rehab, but it was way more difficult for him to come see Ryan, and the baby came to see Ryan like one day, which was like the first time that they met. It was very difficult. But anyway, through the process, I wanted to be transparent, honest, tell Jackson like where daddy was, show him where daddy was, like what was going on. And then when hospice was happening, we did reach out to a child psychologist to ask, what's the right thing here for him? Like, we don't want to say anything that will be detrimental. We don't want to do anything that could cause harm in the long run. And, my intuition was correct. And like, they basically said, you did the right thing, like during this process, just being transparent with him and being very literal and showing him like what is going on, and just continue to do that and leave open the door for him to interact with Ryan or be with Ryan and tell him, daddy was really sick and the doctor's trying to make him better, but he can't get better. And now daddy's going to die. And, if you want to see daddy before you should do that. And you can do all the things, like you can hug daddy and kiss daddy, hold his hand, or we can just sit in the room with him. So just leaving open the door, but not putting pressure on him and saying like, you have to do this. So that's what we did. We let him kind of guide how we showed up for him.
Wow, Mama, you were holding a lot. That makes me want to cry for you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm really sorry you had to go through all that. And still, you are really strong.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, physical exercise, taking care of yourself, and has have any of your relationships changed because of you no longer being in this marriage because he's not here?
Yeah, that's like one of those things about loss and grief that is so hard because you change so much. Like when you're the person that suffers that loss, and people change for a little bit after a loss like that. They're like, "Oh, I'm gonna, live like Ryan or be more appreciative or be more grateful and like do all these things." Like that fades with other people. But for you, you are fundamentally changed forever. And there's no going back. Other people, it's not really their lives that are affected. So they go back to how it was before because they're not changed like you are. Like I said, the change for them is it's not permanent.
Right.
So you lose connections with people because they don't understand you anymore. And I think for me, especially after Ryan died, because I felt such a pull to help other people going through grief and trauma, because I don't know, like I feel not like I'm kind of made to help guide people and be a leader in this. Like I feel like I can hold a lot on my shoulders in terms of holding space for other people and still being able to process my own grief and help other people, which I think is a gift. Like I don't think a lot of people can do that. So for me to share my story so openly and so vulnerably online, I think I don't think everybody really agrees with that. I think they think maybe it's like for attention or for reasons that aren't aligned with what they would think would be appropriate. I think we have some society as a whole, when we lose somebody, especially like a young mother, widow, they don't think that maybe it's appropriate to be so bold and loud and open about these things, that we should keep a lot of these things private. And that's just not what I felt was aligned with my calling after Ryan died, or even what Ryan would want, because I know that he would want me to do what felt in alignment with my new identity now, and just to like go all in with it, because that's what he did in life. And I don't think all people agree with that or think it's what they would do.
But you're super clear. And I think that's the thing, is especially when you get into the online space where you're going to have some people are going to have all kinds of different opinions. And I just love that you're so, you're just super solid with who you are and what you want to do with this. So besides this wonderful book, Running in Trauma Stilettos, which is such a great title, what else do you want to create that's beyond just sharing online? Do you want to create something kind of more structured or tangible through which people can connect and recover some from their grief?
Yeah. So also during the aftermath of Ryan passing, and also, writing this book, I became a certified grief educator through David Kessler's program. He's a very well-known grief educator, and he helps people through grief. So I took his course. So I'm certified to help others, and I offer coaching for those going through similar traumas and grief journeys, to help guide people, find their new identities after loss and get to a place where they find peace in their grief journey instead of just feeling that pain, and just holding space for those that are going through similar events. Because I think the problem, because I see this with messages that I get and also comments that I get and things I share, that people think that after a traumatic loss, especially of a spouse, like that's it for them. Like their life, the best of their life is past. And like, I want people to know that they can actually become their best selves through the loss. They don't have to, they don't have to think that their best days are behind them just because they suffer this kind of loss. And I think that's so sad. Like I want to be evidence that they can do great things after this, because there's a lot of young widows, like it makes me so sad that they think like at the age of like in their 20s and 30s, like this is it.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
no. Even I've had friends that I've known in 40s and 50s who have gone on and recovered and found happiness and remarried, and it's like, yeah, it's just another chapter, and it's not a comparison to what was before. It's an evolution, and that's what we want to do as humans in general. Is that we want to, because at the end of the day, you're Whitney. You're yes, you're a mom and you're a wife, but you're a woman and you're a human, and you should be entitled to as much joy and potential in the future as you did before. It's just changed now. The whole parameters have changed and the ecosystem. So I think that you doing that and showing others is such a great, it's such a great way to make I don't want to say silver lining, but to make what you've been through something that can be so healing for others as well.
Yeah, I just want to give people hope and like evidence that this is possible, because I don't think there's enough evidence that when something like this happens, that people are able to have a happy life after and find joy or love again if that's what they choose to do. There's not enough evidence out there. There's a lot of evidence of the contrary, like there's a lot of evidence that people get into drugs and alcohol, that they become depressed, their mental health issues. Like there's so much evidence on that side, but not enough evidence of like growing and evolving and actually getting better
and thriving. Yeah.
And thriving. Like we need more of that, because that's how people know it's possible. If you don't show them what's possible, then they don't think it is.
Amen. All right. Well, I could talk to you forever. First of all, everybody, please go and check out Whitney Allen's book, Running in Trauma Stilettos. Where else can people find out information about you, find out about the book and the other offerings?
Yeah, so on social media, Instagram and TikTok, I'm at Whitney Lynn Allen, and Lynn is with one N. You can go to my website if you're interested in grief coaching, and that's whitneylynnallen.com. And then on Facebook, it's Whitney Allen, or Whitney Lynn Allen is my business page, but I usually post on my personal page, which is Whitney Allen.
Well, we will have all that in the show notes. And I love that social media brought us together. I just found that clip of yours and I just saw that energy and that desire to really share something in a vulnerable and open way that is giving people permission to also do that. And I think that's really, really important, really important. So thank you so much for your time. And thank you for sharing your heart. And my heart just goes out to yours for this new stage. And I hope you find a lot of joy and continue to heal and help others. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And for everybody who's listening, as always, I'm pulling for you.